Welcome to the second class of Telling Business, Storytelling in Business and Life. I hope everyone enjoyed their tech meeting last week and learned a lot. I'm sure I did. As a reminder, our textbook is Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins by Annette Simmons. Today we're going to talk a little bit about storytelling, where it developed, where it began. There are a lot of different theories about where storytelling began, just as there are a lot of theories about where communication in general began. But we'll start off by talking about a lady named Anne Pawlowski, who wrote a book called The World of Storytelling. She says, in her opinion, that storytelling had its origin in 4 different types of activity. There were play activities. People did it for pleasure. Storytelling is a fun thing. Everyone enjoys it. It was also used in religious rituals, even today. Most of our great religions are based upon stories. It was also used for historical recitations. Historical recitations as in talking about the exploits of the ancestors, or even talking about what happened to you and to your group on a hunt that morning, or on a hunter-gathering sort of activity. It also played an educational function. Stories are entertaining, and that's what makes them so good as educational tools. In fact, a story I'm sure everyone has heard. Little Red Riding Hood. You probably heard it. One of the first things you ever heard, probably sitting on your father or mother's knee, listening to the story of Little Red Riding Hood. And it's a delightful story. You have danger, of course, and that always excites people. But then you also have the saving hunter coming in and saving Little Red Riding Hood and saving Grandma and killing the wolf, and everything is great. But that is the version of Little Red Riding Hood that we hear, and it was written by the Grimm brothers. An odd name for a happy ending story, the Grimm brothers. Actually, it was collected by a man named Charles Perrault in the 17th century in France. He collected it by going around to villages and farms and talking to the common people and getting the stories that they told on a regular daily basis. And one of these stories was Little Red Riding Hood. And it was an enjoyable experience to tell that story, but it was also an educational experience. Because in that story, Little Red Riding Hood, Grandma, they don't survive till the end. The hunter never comes. The wolf is the winner. And why would they tell a story like that? A story that starts off so delightful and chilling and ended with frightful occurrences? Well, one reason is because parents wanted to teach their children, to educate their children. Don't wander off too far from the village. Don't go too far away from mom and dad. Bad things happen out in the world. So, activities, play activities, religious, historical, and educational functions. Walter Fisher, a communication theorist from the University of Southern California, in the 80s was doing a lot of work on narratives and stories. And he said that people are essentially storytellers. Everyone is a storyteller. In fact, your thoughts are basically you telling yourself a story of the experiences you've had in the world today. We make decisions based upon what we judge to be good reasons. And these good reasons come from the stories that we've told ourselves. Good stories, good reasoning are largely determined by the coherence and fidelity of our stories. Our world is a set of stories from which we pick and choose. And thus we constantly are recreating our life, our existence, our experiences. Dr. Fisher went on to write something that we now know today as the narrative paradigm. Narrative for story. Paradigm is sort of a theory. And a theory is sort of a story. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But Dr. Fisher's idea of the narrative paradigm was that all meaningful communication is a form of storytelling. It's a series of ongoing narratives, each with its own conflicts, its own characters, its own beginning, middles, and ends, and most importantly, emotions. A good story must have emotion in it. What is a story? Well, a story is a narrative account of an event. It can be true, it can be fictional, it can be hypothetical. But a story weaves the details of the story, the characters, the events, things that are happening, and it weaves them among emotions. And that whole is greater than the sum of its parts. All of that together makes something that we can remember. A good story describes something true. It describes something that we can understand and believe in. Stories work this way. I have a mathematical sort of statement that sort of explains stories. Information plus emotion equals story. Story equals memory. You see, the brain is basically two hemispheres, two halves. The left side is all the content, all of the steak, the facts, figures, statistics. The right side is emotions. It's the sizzle of the steak, the smell of the steak. It's all of the things that call out to us, that make us want to sit down and enjoy that steak. The most memorable and useful stories, or any kind of presentation, will be those that use both sides of the brain and stimulate them. The left side, facts, figures, statistics. The right side, emotions. We listen to stories because it organizes our worlds. Our brains are always looking for a pattern that we can hang facts, figures, statistics on and remember them more easily. The stories provide the patterns. It weaves together all the complicated information and abstract ideas and moral judgments into a story that we can remember. Stories are the way that we save the information so we can look at it and respond to it and react to it later, at a later time. Stories make it easy to listen. They're enjoyable. And listening allows us to learn. And we learn without suffering any terrible consequences. Remember Little Red Riding Hood by Mr. Perrault. That was a learning experience. We didn't have to go out into the woods and experience the wolf nipping at our feet as we ran away. It was something we experienced vicariously. We didn't have to go through the terrible experience and the ordeal. We survived. We see life, we see choices, and we learn by lessons, by honestly listening and reviewing the lives of others. That way we don't have to suffer the terrible consequences. Each story demands its own structure. Just like a good painting, a good story needs a frame. If you're looking at the Rocky Mountains, it's too much to experience, too much to take in. But if you put a frame around it, a picture of the Rocky Mountains, you can more easily put yourself into that situation. It's something that's more doable, more understandable. Each story should have a frame just like that, just like a picture frame. It focuses the attention and the ideas of the audience. All stories, just like all good speeches, have a thesis statement, a central idea. A little girl going off to visit grandma, going through the woods. It's got a general purpose. Two general purposes, generally. Obviously, the one is to entertain, but the second would be to inform or persuade. In many of our business stories, we're going to want to persuade. So that will be one of our general purposes. Our specific purpose is specifically what we want our audience to know or do. We want our audience, in the Little Red Riding Hood story, to know it is not good to wander out too far by yourself. We all need to find our own stories. Our text describes 6 different kinds of stories. One is the learning story. My story that I will tell here shortly is a learning story. It's basically to learn about communication, about its origin. It's a theory. There are a lot of theories about where communication began. There are few facts, but the facts are so dispersed and scattered, you've got to put things in between them to get you from one point to the next. And that's what story does. But there are different people telling a different story. So the theory will change in that way. What is a theory? Well, a theory is basically a narrative. It could be true, it's possibly true, but it explains and predicts phenomena. It's basically how scientists do their work. Information, especially Einstein. We'll talk more about Einstein in the story period. Information, using the left side of the brain. I used several sources for my story. I used a story from hand to mouth, a book from hand to mouth. I used a book called The Ape Speaks. Both of those are in your bibliography at the end of the story. I encourage you to look at them. That's the meat, that's the potatoes, that's the left side of the brain, where I got these stories. They are stories, they are books written by scholars. They are scholarly theories of what the communication was, how it started. Then I put the right side of the brain, the emotion. I made it, the story, a little less broad. I specified it a bit more. I put some experiences and some emotions to it and made it a story that we can remember. Telling your story. Everyone can tell a story in their own way. Everyone tells their story from their own set of skills, their own mind, their own body, their own voice. But story, the main thing about story is an all-in proposition. It's not, oh, well, I'm going to tell this today because I really sort of used to like this story. You got to really commit to the story. You got to commit to the story mentally, physically, and vocally. You got to commit to it emotionally, mentally, physically. And you must be consciously in the moment. You can't be thinking about something else. You've got to be here. You've got to be amongst us. You've got to be talking to us. You've got to be engaging your audience. That is the most important thing.